course, China is trying to become a more innovative society, less reliant on foreign technology, and you see a lot of interest in low carbon technologies being one of the key ways that their technology will evolve and their know-how in this sector. So you see sort of a combination of innovation policies and energy policies really pushing forward a lot of these low carbon technologies. So I think that China's INDC targets really are a deviation from business as usual. They will require real and challenging domestic efforts to meet them. There's a lot happening at the local level in China. Now that these targets have been put in place at the national level, you see provincial governments around the country very seriously beginning to put forward policies to start to measure and regulate carbon dioxide emissions. This is something that most facilities in China have never done before because it wasn't regulated, it wasn't tracked, it wasn't measured, right? And we know that before you can regulate something, you need to know how much of it you have. And so there's a lot of attention being focused on inventories at the local level. And of course, as Vance mentioned, China's working towards a national cap and trade program to control carbon dioxide. So there's a lot of excitement at the local level about building carbon markets. And again, that requires registries and inventories in order to track that. These intensity targets, again, are a deviation from business as usual. I think particularly as we see GDP growth starting to slow in China. For example, the EIA scenario that I showed you where China's intensity target is going to decline shows GDP growth declining from, I think it was about 12% to 6% a year. So you're going to see a slowing of economic growth, which makes it even harder to achieve an intensity target. And again, the renewable energy targets, I think, while they could be more aggressive, they are tempered probably just by the current challenges that are being faced. And I think that as these are worked out, you may see much more aggressive targets. In the past, it's been very common for renewable energy targets to be put forward and then later actually increased once they realized that they could overachieve those targets. And finally, all of these targets, of course, will require a major decrease in coal use in China. And this is not going to be easy. I think anyone who says that these targets are just business as usual and will be easy for China to meet are kidding themselves. If you're aware of how much coal is still being used in China and will continue to be burned in the absence of incentives and shifts to really to change that. And this is, of course, good for air pollution to reduce coal use, but it's not going to be easy for the local economy. A lot of people are employed in the coal industry in China, and of course, unemployment is a potential driver of instability, and that is the last thing that the Chinese government would like to see. So I think this is going to be a bumpy road, but something that the government's extremely committed to, and so I think it will be interesting to watch how they achieve it in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. And our next speaker is Wang Tao, resident scholar, Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy in Beijing. He's an expert on climate and energy issues and runs a program at the Center for Global Policy examining China's climate and energy policies with particular attention to transportation and the international climate negotiations. He was previously a program manager at the World Wildlife Fund, China, and a researcher at the UK's Tyndall Centre at the University of Sussex. Has a really global reputation on these issues. So, Tao, we're glad to hear from you today.
Thank you, Paul. It's really a privilege to be here, and also thanks for coming. Very honored to be able to speak here. I think we have already heard a lot from Vance and also Joanna about what's China's targets and also what China plans to do, especially on the aspect of the energy and climate policies. So I think I will probably spend my 10 minutes on a few things that is probably wider on this, and especially to addressing some of the wide pictures in China's economy and the potential risks and barriers we may face. And I will give you some examples of that. I think I will spend my time to talk about 3 points first. Mostly, the first one is China's economy is at a crossroad, and this could lead to what we call the new normal. But also, if we didn't handle well, it could also turn into a catastrophe in the economic side, and that will also affect the energy demand from China. The second one is I'll talk about why Chinese government is so committed to these targets and the transitions. The third one, I would make the point that it's imperative for China to success in those energy transition, and there is huge risks if we didn't do well, and there could be potential risks that economy and also other issues will go off rail. And I'll give you an example of recent case developed in China. And if I still have some time, I will address a little bit on how U.S.-China could maybe cooperate on that, and I'll give an example of my recent study. So we all noticed that the Chinese economy has slowed down dramatically from over 10% every year to now just about 7%. I think the latest estimate of the economic growth is even lower than that. There are a few even more worrying numbers from the energy indicators if you look at that as a more accurate estimate of what's going on in the energy and also economy. The coal consumption in 2014 was for the first time decreased in China in nearly 2 decades, and it was down by 3%. Mostly, I think I wouldn't like to break it down. Basically, I think there are joint forces from both the policies initiated by the Chinese government to improving the air qualities and addressing the climate change issues, but also it's due to the overcapacity of the heavy industries in China. There is overcapacity and a huge competition among some of the heavy industries. So that also contributes to the reduction of the coal. And if you look at other fossil fuel energies, the situation is almost the same. If you took crude oil as one example, China's crude oil has increased so much over the last 2 decades, and we are now the world's largest importer of the world, overtaking U.S. But the growth rate was down to 6% last year, with also much lower level in average. And if you look into the details of that consumption, it's more worrying because we only got the growth in certain category of the oil product, like the gasolines. That is reflected to the demand of the people buying more cars, passenger cars, and driving out. And that is understandable because the passenger car ownerships in China are still much lower compared with developed countries. There is still huge room for people in the 3rd or 4th tier cities to have their first ever car in their family history. So they will drive more, and they will embrace the new convenience being offered to them by cars. But if you look at other products like the diesel in China, diesel is most responsible for the construction machines, agriculture sectors, and also the freight, road freight and trucks. Those demands are actually very weakened. China has been built up a lot of capacities to provide enough diesel for our demand for the past decades, but now we suddenly see the demand has decreased. And for the 2 years in a row, the diesel demand has declined, and that is also quite unprecedented. If you look at electricity in general, electricity is also decreased in terms of the growth rate, and that is also worrying figures. Most of the coal-fired power plants, even though we are still building more, but the average working hours of the coal-fired power plants in China are decreasing, and significantly. Many of them are running at deficit. So there is a worrying figures on that. But as a result of that, there is increase in the share from the non-fossil fuels. So at the moment, over a quarter of China's electricity is generated by the non-fossil fuels like the wind, the solar PV, hydro, and nuclear. And that is at the same level as the European Union and about a double of the level of the United States. So that is quite encouraging side for if you look at the renewables, but then it's quite worrying for the coal-fired power plants and fossil fuel investment. The next one is natural gas. Natural gas is being identified as a kind of bridge fuel for China because it's much cleaner compared with coal. Many cities are actually force the coal-fired power plants to move out of cities, replaced with a gas, like city in Beijing because of the air pollution. And there's also huge subsidies given by the government to use the LNG in the lorries. So you will be able to reduce both the emissions from the transportation and also even lower the cost because LNG is still cheaper in China compared with diesel. But despite that, the growth rate is still far lower than the expectations. Many of the Chinese state-owned energy companies signed large deals with the LNG suppliers in Qatar, in Australia, in Malaysia, and also recently we signed the deal with Russia. But then we realized the demand of the natural gas may not be growing as much as we expected. So there is a concern about how the economy is going. And I think there is a lot to do with the recent efforts to clean up the air, to improve the non-fossil energy share, but also down to the competition overcapacity of the heavy industries. China is now at the point that we can no longer rely on the heavy industrialization investment anymore. The second one is why Chinese government is so committed to that. I think we already heard a lot of the reasons, not to mention about the worry about air pollution from the major cities. The middle class are really demanding the cities or mayors or policymakers to respond to that. And there's a huge pressure from central government to the local government to respond to that. But there's also China's own plan to produce more and more clean energies in there. First of all, China still sees itself as a rising power. And in this process of rising to the global stage, China wants to be seen as a more responsible power. So there is pressure from the international communities and also from within that they want to do more. So there will be better reputations when they become a power in the future. There's also competitiveness consideration in there. China is particularly interested in building up its own industrial capacities over the time. So we'll be able to become world leaders in some of the new technologies like the wind power, solar PVs, electric vehicles, high-speed railways, or even third generation or fourth generation of the nuclear power. Those are kind of identified by Chinese government and also the scholars as the fourth generation of the fourth industrial revolution. We feel like we have missed all these three before, and now this is the fourth one. There's a golden opportunities for China to catch up. So there is a strong motivation, even with themselves, to take responsibility and also take measures to address that. But as I said before, there is very strong risks associated with that. We have talked a lot about China's economy transiting to the new normal, and there is a huge investment into the renewables. And at the same time, when the Chinese government, the central and local, are trying to fight the pollution by closing down some of the dirty industries, sometimes through the command and control command, which is very strong and arbitrary and without much leverage for flexibilities. And that could cause problems. For example, there is a city in Shandong province called Linyi. Shandong province is China's largest province, China's province with the largest energy demand and possibly the largest emissions. It's a very heavy industrial based. This city is a typical third, fourth tier cities, very poor, but is trying to catch up with industrialization process. They have built into a lot of heavy industries. And the previous mayors and policymakers attract them to make the investment into these cities by giving away some of the requirements of environment standards or help them to cut corners in certain investment in environment pollution protections. Then what happens to this new mayor is by the turn of this year, the CCTV, which is China's central television, they have a program called Dialogue, basically to go around and do some of the undercover video and check the situations. And of course, these days, air pollution is a big issue. So they are looking at the industry, say which are those polluters actually causing problems in Beijing. So they kind of like undercover camera these cities which covered with brown and black smokes and very dirty images of the whole city. And in fact, the PM 2.5 and air pollution index are also very poor for the cities, always around the bottom of the country. So somehow when this was broadcasted in the national media, in the national city television, the mayor was so much humiliated. And he was also caught up by his supervisors and got a talk with many persons. And he decided that he is going to lead examples and launch a campaign against the pollution. So from January to May, he's actually literally just stopped a lot of these factories in that cities by command, asked them to stop the productions unless you can prove that you codify the environment qualities and standards. And the command is very strong and almost immediate effect. There is nothing left for the negotiation. So he's so powerful in those commands, then a lot of businessmen are actually